alive. Can people on the screen hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm Karen Hiller. I'm the chair of the Topeka City Council's Public Health and Safety Committee. It is May 26th at 10 a.m. Two of the three committee members will be here today. We're meeting in the executive conference room in City Hall. And so we have two of us and the city manager here live, and our chief
The staff.
of staff, not chief operating officer. Anyway, I get it. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the screen, 6 on the screen. So they'll introduce themselves as they're engaged throughout this process. Again, I'm Karen Hiller. I represent District 1. My colleague here today is
Christina Valdivia Alcala, representing District 2, and this is my first year on the committee.
And we are missing today Councilman Dobler from District 7, so it will just be us, as we learned just this week, so sorry about that. But we'll do fine. And City Manager, Brent Trout.
Yes, thank you.
Without any further ado, I will call the meeting to order. We have minutes from the March 24th meeting to approve.
Move to approve.
Motion to approve, I'll second. Any corrections, discussion? With that, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. We have two primary discussion items today, broadband and the property and premises proposal. We also toggle with the issue of homeless. That is not on the agenda today, but it will be at our next meeting. That's what we expect. So, item number 3 then, broadband is up. Our Councilman Dobler has been managing that issue, and a committee that's been meeting on the side to work on that issue. So what we need to do is entertain updates from you all. Our goal is to get in place at some point a standing working group that can manage this issue. Scott has unmuted. Do you want to start, Scott? Scott and Lazone. Scott Gowan from USD 501 and Lazone Gray from IBSA are online and have really been working on that issue, and Mike Siebert from DCF as well.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started with a few updates to share with the committee. First of all, we've added some new players to our team. We now represent the city of Topeka, the Greater Topeka Partnership, ISBA Incorporated. Topeka Shawnee County Public Library has joined and is working with our group as well. Jayhawk Area Agency on Aging, of course, Topeka Public Schools. And then we've added to this the Housing and Credit Counseling Group and Topeka Housing Authority. We have spent since our last meeting, our primary initiative has been putting together an application for a $250,000 3-year grant. We've been working to try to, in our previous meeting, we had introduced our pillars of what it is that we're looking to achieve. Basically, pillars 1 and 2 were affordable and equitable access to connectivity, and then of course affordable devices. Pillars 1 and 2 at this point, we're working with the FCC and other groups to try to satisfy those demands. But pillars 3 and 4 are the ones that we've been kind of focusing on more as a team lately. And that's the pillar 3 was the digital literacy, citizenship, and technical support. And then pillar 4 is funding and sustainability. By pursuing this grant from, I got a note here, from the Kansas Health Foundation, by pursuing this grant, it will give us some starting capital to get our 1 FTE, our combined 1 FTE, to focus on our digital navigator position, as well as a technical navigator, because we feel like these two pieces of the puzzle are what's currently missing from
recording in progress.
I'm sorry about that. We feel like these two pieces of the puzzle are the pieces we're going to need to have in place in order to be able to point people in the right direction, and in order to be able to support them in their adoption of digital connectivity in the home. Those are the key points that I wanted to introduce, kind of the goings-on that we've been doing as a team. I will say that this is a very strong team of great leaders, and I think that that's the ingredient that's going to make this successful. I'm humbled by the people working with us on that committee. I mean, it's been a great experience. So we have several people on the call who might have additional things to add to those key points, but we wanted to give you that update.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I also failed to recognize Monique Laudet. She's on our community engagement staff and perhaps is involved as I listen to the conversation, since the possibility of getting the Navigate, she had some ideas on accessing the Navigator position, right? Sorry, Monique. Thank you for being here and being on board as well.
You're welcome. That's quite all right.
Monique is doing some very heavy lifting for us, in particular right now. She's been instrumental in putting together the pieces for this grant, and she and her team will be kind of guiding that process through. So we're really appreciative of all of the work that Monique has contributed to this cause.
Thank you. Does anybody else on the team, Lazone, Mike, Monique, have anything to add? Mike is nodding his head no. Lazone, no. Help us all out then, because we've all been reading about the broadband subsidies that are coming out through the providers, and surely those are significant. Can you talk about those at least for a minute?
I'd be glad to, unless Lazone would like to interject. He's been working on that end of the spectrum longer than I. Lazone, would you like to answer it?
I will. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I'll just be brief. The Emergency Broadband Benefit Program through the FCC started on the 12th, and it has been rolling along. I think over 1 million nationwide have already signed up for the program. And so it has been a benefit, and I think that we have done outreach and have helped a few people. Of course, Scott and USD 501, they have the ability to have done outreach to their population, as well as Cox and the actual service providers have reached out to their individuals. There have been some hiccups with the overall program nationwide because there was a rush of people that sort of flooded the website and some unclear information about the use of email and some other things. So I don't think that will affect us. It won't affect us on what we are doing. I think that we're looking to the long term. Any help or anyone that wants to know more information about the EBB, there's been a lot of support in promoting it through the public library, the TV stations, and through various entities such as 501, our organization, and a few others. So I think that we still need to get more word out about that and see what we can do to help identify people who would be eligible and help them shepherd through the process. I also believe that depending on the timing, I don't believe that will run out by the time this grant is awarded. So it would be great if we are awarded that grant, that the digital navigator can also step in and be a part of helping on the end run on helping us identify those that are eligible. But I think that we're doing the best that we can with what we have to work with, and I'm really more excited about where we go and what we're looking at beyond EBD, because that's where the heavy lifting and the teamwork matters. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Megan Bottenberg is just now punching in as well. She's with Cox, and so she might have some thoughts as well. Could you help us with how long this program will last? And I know that one of the things we talked about before was that the program that we focused on at first, that was at 501, was obviously for kids and families. And we talked about, what about seniors? What about people that were job seekers? What about other folks? How does this overlap or replace what's happening at 501? How does it broaden availability, and how long will it last? Or, of course, we don't know exactly, but how long do we expect it to last? Was
the question for Megan, or would you like me to go ahead and?
Go ahead.
So this program is basically, it's an improvement upon the work that 501 has been working and doing with Cox. And so in our partnership with Cox, we're reaching out to all of the families that we currently serve through that partnership, and we're recommending that they pursue this because essentially they can choose a higher level of service than the service that the district has been able to provide on their behalf. And they can also get the additional benefit of $100 toward a device for the house. Our student devices are only in the house during the time that the students are in the school. And so that does create an opportunity for them to go ahead and pursue some independence of the school through this emergency broadband benefit. And so we're really excited about that. And we are very appreciative that Cox has been able to provide us the materials for our families in both Spanish and English. So we've been able to reach out to those families. Not only the families that are doing our partnership, but the families who this emergency broadband benefit is available to many more families than are currently eligible for the partnership. And so by getting those families on board as well, we're really hoping to saturate our community with those that are able to participate in this process.
Other comments from Mike, Lazone, Monique, and then Megan, if you're fully on at this point from Cox?
I will just say thank you so much, Scott, and your entire team, Lazone and Chairwoman Pillar. I think we are thrilled to have been a part and to be a part of this program. We, without hesitation, raised our hand and said we want to help. And I think it goes to the testament of our partnership with Scott and Topeka 501. And it also goes to the testament that we know how important internet is and adoption is. And so we continue to look at ways to partner with the city and with you all to find more ways to partner and help more folks get internet and get what they need. So we are happy and open to discussing more options and looking at more options because we know that this impacts families directly, but we know that there are more folks that are in need. So happy to have those continuing discussions.
Questions?
I do.
Yeah, please.
New to the group, to the gang, so this $250,000 grant through the Kansas Health Foundation, when is that grant application due?
Monique, do you remember the exact date? I want to say it was June 4th.
Sure. It's June 4th, yes.
Okay.
And do y'all anticipate a lot of competition for that $250,000?
I would imagine there will be a lot of competition. The one thing I can say that will be an advantage for us is we began working on this some time ago, whereas other communities will see the opportunity and just be forming the coalitions necessary to really do the kind of work that we're planning to do. And keep in mind, I must say it came from our conversations actually in this committee, where we started looking at, it's not just about getting the devices in the hands. It's not just about getting the connectivity in the hands. It's about, okay, now that that's out there, how do we get people to choose it? How do we get people to, once they choose it, use it and be able to make a difference in their lives with that? And that's really the focus that we have in this application. That's really the focus that we have as a group of leaders. We want to see people succeed, and we know that this is a path to success in the 21st century, and so we want to make sure they have a good, comfortable route along that path.
Thank you. And where, if we were to get this grant, where would the position be housed out of?
Monique, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Councilmember Valdivia Alcala, the position would be housed in my division. It would be, we're taking the one FTE and splitting it in half, and it will be half of a community digital navigator and half of a technical navigator. And the purpose for that is that it's essential that we also don't make any assumptions that our neighbors would know how to use the devices after they acquired them. So that technical navigator would literally be there to help our neighbors walk through the steps to be able to become experts at utilizing their tools.
And so this would be quite a bit of outreach. I'm trying to get a feel for this, just coming on board with it. So I would imagine this would be a lot of outreach, and this is going beyond 501 into communities like with elders, or maybe folks that, have cable but don't have any experience with computers, et cetera. That position would be used to help educate those people, correct?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am.
And then with the additional dollars, because I had a really interesting conversation with Lazone, and Lazone to me is an idea-driven person, and I love ideas, and ideas that make sense, ideas that meet the needs of community, and then how to execute those ideas. So in conversations that him and I had and talking about my district and other districts, let's just say in North Topeka, there's a dearth of elder folks that know how to utilize computers. So when we think about the possibility of getting this grant, is this something that you see that this full-time position could be, that would go out into community and maybe set up some space or help folks set up an area in North Topeka or maybe in Oakland or whatever to help elderly that do not have the expertise but have the desire to learn and have some type of digital literacy?
Yes, ma'am. So we are in the stages now of creating a pretty aggressive implementation plan. So our goal is that we are definitely applying for this grant, but ultimately we are going to continue on to forge ahead to create a program. So if we don't obtain this funding, the next opportunity of funding that arises, that we're able to grasp at as well. So I'll share a tad bit with you. With this being a part-time person, this is just seed money. We're definitely looking for other funding mechanisms where I believe we need 2 full-time community digital navigators for the sole purpose of being able to service as many of our 60,355 low to moderate income persons that reside in Topeka, to ensure that everyone has the same opportunity and has access to the information. As Scott alluded to earlier, one of the focuses of our group is to ensure that we're providing the opportunities to all of our neighbors so they can improve their quality of life, whatever that may be, through employment, through access to their health information, to being able to reach family members, whatever it might be. We want to ensure that all of our LMI neighbors have that same information and those opportunities. So yes, ma'am, that this person or these persons would be going out to the community. We would be hosting pop-up events at every viable opportunity and location we possibly can. That's why we thought it was essential to bring those stakeholders to the table. Susan Harris, the ED at JAAA. It has wonderful access to our senior community. We know that Mr. George at Topeka Housing Authority has access to at least 5,000 persons of his tenants that we know would fit under this auspice. So yes, we will be saturating the community, and that's why the majority of the budget for the first year or two will be for marketing, because we want to definitely saturate our community with this information so everyone that could possibly need to utilize it would have access to it, the information, and to the service.
Thank you, Monique. And I just a little bit, just to finish on that thought. Monique, having worked with you in the past on a couple of outreach initiatives with the SORT grant, and also seeing how you all executed the giving the boxes of food away, I really think it's important, and I think you have a handle on it, to understand how to go beyond the marketing that is social media driven.
Absolutely.
Whether that be door hangers or knocking on doors, I'd always offered to do that, and you were always down with doing that. And so that is really that thinking out of the box, because what we're trying to do, right, the goal would be to get to those people that don't have access to and are familiar with social media. So I think that marketing tools are going to be imperative in thinking of creative ways. Again, outreach, going to the people is always the best thing. But, I really hope that we do get the grant then. Thank you, Monique.
We appreciate you. You're most welcome.
If I may,
Go ahead.
Mike, go ahead.
A couple of things that come to mind. One is,
the Topeka Public Library hasn't been a part of these meetings, but they now have computers in all the community centers, and they've started being allowed for those to be able to be used somewhat post the climax of COVID. And so those are available. I know at Central Park, they have wireless that's available outside the building if someone can't get in. But going back to the public library, they have had classes in the past on how to use computers, how to access different things. It might be worth it to have them come to the table when it comes to the training, so that they are been there, done that kind of thing, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel in that category potentially, I guess.
I will share that Thad Hartman has joined our group as one of the leaders that are helping to put some of this together specifically for that reason. They have experience in this space. They have valuable tools that they can bring to bear, and we realize that the library is in a state of transition, but we want to make sure that they're part of this while we get this underway as well. So I will share that he has been part of that. But that actually echoes a point that I'd like to add on to the pieces that Monique shared. One of the strengths of this strategy that we're implementing is that it's not going to be tied to the currently 1 FTE that we're seeking and potentially expanded 2 FTEs that we're looking at. We're actually wanting to partner with community groups. One of the things we learned at 501 when we did our initiative to make sure our families had a device, make sure our families had a connection, and make sure our families had what they needed to be successful with learning during this period of time. One of the things that we quickly learned is that the community groups are just as eager as we were to see this be successful. And so there are several community groups that will take advantage of opportunities if we put some infrastructure into place for them. And so part of this grant is some equipment that can be utilized in specific places and leave permanent footprints in these neighborhoods, because everyone will not adopt at the same time. We might be able to reach, we might be lucky enough to reach 10% of the families that currently do not do this right now. And that will be an undertaking just to reach 10%, right? But next year it might be another 10%. It might be another 20%. We want to be able to make sure we have some community groups to assist with this effort and help the people that they already are in contact with and make sure that those pieces are out there. Because that's the way we're going to reach the houses and the families. That's the way we're going to reach these communities.
I have a thought for you all, and maybe you've discussed it as somebody who's not one of the high-end users and tech people on this. Periodically, I've needed some help, and the library over time has had on a schedule, a reliable schedule, this drop-in thing at the library where you could just show up with your pad or your phone or your laptop and take a number literally and get helped by, in that case, it's library staff. But if there are volunteer groups who could staff, I think of that model at the library and things like VITA to do people's taxes, where you're just there and you've got the door open and people can just drop in, no questions asked, just what are you trying to do? I've been through that at the library, and it's just, you don't mind waiting, and everybody's there because they couldn't figure out how to do something. And the staff has always been flexible and good, and I don't know if you're imagining that as part of your model, but as you talk about the community centers being available in THA with its sites as well, that gets you in existing locations all around the community. I see you nodding, so it sounds like you thought of that model as well.
Councilmember Heller, that's part of our implementation plan. We will have these pop-up events. Our intent is to go into the community. We know that there's a large segment of our population that it's hard for them to get to the library. So the intent for us is to go into the neighborhoods, to be able to announce in enough time, do mailings, to let them know that we'll be there, and we'll be there for drop-in sessions all around the community to be able to help, just like you had described.
Yeah, because that's so portable, really. You could take a computer with you, but that's not even necessary, arguably, so great. Did you have some more questions?
No.
Because you're welcome to have all you can think of. Well, it is exciting. Any more things to share with us? It's nice to pull this together.
I can't think of any, oh, go ahead, Monique.
Sorry, Scott, the only other thing, council members, that we did need to share is part of the requirement of the grant is they ask for pretty bold policies that are established. So we have began the process of establishing and providing you with some sample verbiage that we probably will have for you the next week or two that we'll send for your approval for us to be able to include that. Other than that, do know that added on to what Lazone said, community engagement has distributed over 3,000 EBB infographics to persons who have been receiving Harvesters food boxes over the last 2 weeks. And so we're going to continue to push that out as aggressively as we possibly can in grassroots manner that doesn't include, in addition to social media. So we are excited about, first of all, the partnership. There's no way this could have taken place without this great group of collaborative partners, and everyone is bringing all their skill sets, and we have been rolling up our sleeves, and we'll be doing so through this weekend to finalize the grant to be able to provide it to the city manager early next week. So we're excited about the opportunity and many more that hopefully this will afford us in the near future. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, it's really exciting that the committee bringing this from the committee level onto the table will give the vacationing Councilman Dobler credit for getting it on the table. It's very gratifying to see that we had the right people in the community and the right people at the table, and that this is really evolving. So thank you for that work. Monique, you said you had some policy things. Your grant is due in less than 2 weeks. So is there something you're needing us to do within the next 2 weeks? Let's clarify here.
I'm going to provide the verbiage to the committee, to our group before the end of the day today, and then we will push it out to the committee to take a look at and ask you if you could please just give us some of your thoughts. Unfortunately, council members, we found out about this grant on May the 7th. So we have less than 30 days to put all this together. So we don't want you to think that we overlooked it or been sitting around trying to them. We have just been rolling along, trying to do as much as possible. So we will forward that to you in the next couple of days and just ask if you to review it and could provide us any of your thoughts going forward.
I want to say something. I would just say as well that seeing this type of collaboration and partnership, I believe is really important and vital, because we know that projects are usually much stronger, much more expansive and cohesive when we can work in partnerships rather than one or two entities, because then you have more people at the table, and it is good to know that there is Black and brown representation at this table. And I just want to say, in the number of conversations that I've had lately with Lazone, I know you have been in this realm for a long time with digital literacy. So I don't think you hear it enough, but you should. You bring a wealth of expertise to the table, and I just see a future with you being at whatever table I'm at. So good job. Good job to everybody on this.
Just some further clarifications for where we are and next steps. Monique, you actually said that your idea is in this grant is to bring on 2 part-time people rather than 1 full-time person. Is that
Yes, ma'am.
Is that right? And
Yes.
when you talked about this last month, you were talking about even possibly using AmeriCorps people for outreach. Is that right?
Potentially. I need to. Here's the concern. The concern is that we first need to be able to identify the role of the technician. And so that is Scott's expertise. And so he's working on that. And so we want to, the funding won't be available until the first week of August. And our goal is to have the program up and running, at least in the first phase, before the end of August. And so once we are able to identify what our implementation plan is, we may ask for an AmeriCorps Vista. Ideally, I believe what the need is going to be, and this is just my projections, is that we are going to need a full-time community digital navigator, including our part-time community navigator, that will be paid for out of this grant. And we just need to secure additional funds. This is too much for one person to handle, and I do believe that we're going to need to bump that up. And so our goal will be to look for additional funding as soon as we possibly can to be able to bring on another community navigator and a digital navigator as well.
Okay.
I have a question with that.
Go ahead.
And I'm just asking this maybe to the city manager or whoever may have knowledge, the money that we're anticipated to get, what are we calling it now?
American Rescue Plan.
American Rescue Plan, that would be it. Is there the possibility of utilizing any of those funds for this?
Yes, there is the possibility. The issue that we're going to have to get into is how detailed is the availability of that funding. And what I mean by that is it says broadband infrastructure. So does that mean putting cable in the ground, fiber in the ground? What does it really mean?
Or getting people with tablets that they know how to use at
Or
home.
does it mean getting them devices? And so that's the hard part for us. We know that the American Rescue Plan says assisting in broadband support. And so we believe that it will be one of those projects that we'll bring to the governing body to consider for funding once we get to that point. Our intent is to figure out what we want to do with that, what our options are for that money, and then bring that list of basically a laundry list or grocery list, however you want to put it, of options that are available, and then figure out how we want to spend the money. And we're trying to be careful. We don't need to be in a hurry. We have until December of 2024 to spend this money. So there is not a huge rush. A lot of people are wanting to rush, got to get this money out. No, we don't. We want to make sure that we've thought through, because this is very special one-time money, $45.6 million of one-time money that's available to us to do a multitude of things. We will not have an issue of being able to spend it all, because we know that water and sewer infrastructure is a catch-all in the end of the day. Whatever we don't utilize in other ways, we can use in that way. So spending all the money will not be an issue. It's just us making sure that we touch on all of our options and fund the right things for our community.
Okay, thank you.
And it sounds like we weren't sure who would be the lead, but if it turns out that we're sort of migrating into the city being the lead, at some point, I suppose someone deserves a report to, someone should be delivering a report to the council.
Yes, we
as a
will.
body, and walking through the fact that we've never been in a role of broadband management or education before, if there's a feeling that we should be.
It is. It's a new territory for us, but it's always been something that, as the city versus school covers, 501 covers only one area.
Right.
We have other people that live in our city that attend other schools, and so really, I think that's part of the reason that we looked at having it be the city that handles this. We have some capacity with the outreach requirement. It made sense to look at having it under Monique and the Community Engagement Division. And so I think there's a lot of pluses in that regard, having it underneath the city.
Well, and it's new territory for us, but it's becoming, there are other cities that actually own the utility, and it appears we don't need to do that.
Right.
And if we are looking at just filling in whatever roles are needed, traveling light in a way, you all have done very good work. So we should put this on our agenda for next month. It sounds like, though, it might just be a progress report if the grant is still under consideration and things are rolling along with EBB. What should we have on our agenda for next time? Scott might have something.
I'd like to be an optimist and say we're going to find another opportunity to be able to pursue by that next meeting. But let's assume that that's not the case, and it's just going to be an update, and we can let you know where our progress is on some of the other pieces of this puzzle, particularly that third pillar and the fourth pillar, just trying to have those pieces in place. So
Okay, and if there is a need for us as a city, kind of no matter whether we get this grant or not, to establish that policy statement, that's what city council do. So if it's in draft to get it in, but you want to be working on finishing that up so that we have it in place, that could be something for the June meeting as well? No pressure, just trying to make sure we're doing our part in a timely way to plug back in with the good work that you're doing.
And Madam Chair, if I may add, all awardees will be notified on July the 5th.
Right after our June meeting. Well, make sure you let us know when you find out, okay?
Absolutely.
City manager, anything else that,
Not from me.
okay. All right, well, thank you all for your good work and for joining us, and we will look forward to an email sometime, even this week, which there's not much left of. And wish you well on your grant writing, and we'll talk to you in June. Thanks again. All right. We will move on in our agenda to picking up the issue of property and premises. This issue has been, we spent a good deal of 2020 on this issue with Mike Haugen, who from Code Compliance, who is on deck with us virtually, going through step by step what the Code Compliance Department does now and what's working. Had some discussion amongst the committee about things that we were aware of one way or another that people thought might use some improvement. The thought had been last year, just to bring it forward, that once we had some basic knowledge on the committee so that we could do a better job as a hearing panel, that we would go out to the public and get public input on what the agenda really should be. With COVID, that wasn't practical. And so what happened at the committee level was that the then committee, which did include Councilman Dobler, did not yet include Councilwoman Valdivia, said to me, okay, you're the chair and you're knowledgeable about this. Why don't you just put together some goals and objectives for us, and we'll just skip over and start to move on goals and objectives. And so I did do that in the fall. We looked at them a couple of times at the committee level. What has happened since then, again with no hearings, is that the staff, City Manager Trout, Department Head Haugen, and the gentleman at the police department that he reports to, Lieutenant?
Lieutenant Bates.
Lieutenant Badel, Andy Badel. We have had successive meetings over that 6 months talking about, okay, if these are the goals, how could we do it? What could the staff do? What would we need in the community? Would we need policy changes? Really chewed and hammered how those goals, if recommended by the committee and passed by the council, how they could be achieved. What we have today, back with the committee, is actually verbatim the last version of the aspirational goals and the 4 possible action steps or challenges, each one of which is sort of involved to bring back to this committee. At the recommendation of City Manager Trout, the idea was to walk through them with the committee today. If there was a comfort level with those being the fundamentals, the aspirational goals, and accepting the 4 as the challenges to put out to the staff, we could do a preliminary approval and then set a calendar, an immediate turnaround for the staff to come back with a response to those challenges on how the staff would propose to meet those challenges. Most of them are in a 3 to 5 year results range, the way they've been challenged out. And that we would then, at our next meeting, be able to have, the idea was to turn around those responses within the next 10 days to 2 weeks, so that the committee would have a good 10 days to 2 weeks prior to the next meeting to process those so that we could spend our June meeting talking about them and then take them out on the road. Let the council know what we've been talking about in July, take them out on the road, probably live and virtually, for public input on here's the problems, here's the challenges, what do you think about these strategies to make some progress, with the idea of being able to then come back with some firm, either that same document that we're going to look at today or something different that the council could approve, but also have those things that are policy changes ready to go, and a plan of action that the staff is comfortable with in place. That all depends on whether we're ready to move this. Councilwoman Valdivia, as I has lots of code issues and lots of issues, lots of questions and so on. So we're going to spend today going through those priorities and having some discussion with staff about what our considerations were, what those responses might be, and we'll see where we are by the end of the meeting. We do have only 2 of us, which I'm uncomfortable with doing the preliminary, yet we could certainly get with Councilman Dobler if the 2 of us feel like it's ready to move, and just keep it moving. Because the idea would be not to go public with it until July anyway, but to just keep working. So that's where we are. I actually have, if it would be, it's kind of a conversation mostly with you, but if it would be helpful, I've got the proposal, sort of Cliff's Notes, if you will, on a PowerPoint, and we can go through it that way, or we can go through it through the paper model. What's your preference?
Well, this is the deal. I mean, I think that obviously we need to go through this, but there are so many bullet points that I have that I really believe I should say before we go into this.
Okay.
Because now that I'm a part of this committee, and because there are such issues in my district, as well as in other parts of Topeka, it may end up having this be tweaked. So,
Absolutely.
and so this is the first part. There's probably 3 main things I want to speak about. Is one, we have, and we know we have historically had a number of code issues. I've looked through all the meeting minutes and I've seen a lot of numbers pop out. And if I could go back 10 or 15 years to see how cases have lessened or increased or whatever, that would certainly be valuable to me. But we know that we have a big problem.
Right.
I'm not going to say a little problem. I'm going to say we have a big problem. We have a big problem that you all have already discussed with the amount of time it takes, with the number of perhaps leeway, or however we want to call them, that some of these folks might get once they get to court, writing up the same properties over and over. I believe that there is a shortage of code compliance officers. I remember saying that right when I first got into office. And I was told by a code person, well, yes, we do, but then we don't want to have too many more because then that will really clog the court system. I don't believe that that is a proactive way to look at things as we seek to make our communities better. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to ask first, because I want to make sure that I have my information correct. And I guess this question is going to be for Mike. I was given a link by Brad Burkett, because obviously people that work in code know that I don't have a whole lot of confidence in the see-click fix. And the way that I deal with my cases is, as I get them, I keep track of them, which is mind-boggling. And I know it's not going to be able to stay that way. Okay, but I was given a link to the app mygov.us. And when I clicked on that link, and I need to know for sure if based on that link, if that is currently showing all the open cases that are detailed by district. And I need to know if somebody can answer that question for me.
Mike?
The answer is yes. You have to dig into that app, and you have to go to your district. You can have them email your district or your NIA, and that program will email you all the open cases a set amount of time. So like if you want it on the first of the month, you can schedule it out for the first of the month that you receive all of our open cases on the properties that are in your district.
Right. So thank you for that, because I wanted to make sure. And I also want to make sure, I don't know how or who updates them from when they go to the open status to the closed status, and how this may differ from C-Click Fix, which may be only what constituents call in, or if this app for MyGovUS has both constituent called in complaints, C-Click Fix complaints, and when you guys are out driving around. Because what I did is I was amazed that it went by district. And so I went through every single district, and I looked all the way down to the bottom where it has a total cases, and then it has a total of addresses. And so let me just go down the list real quick. District 1, 504 cases. District 2, my district, 524 cases. And this is where I think something may be wrong in the system. District 3, 8,766 cases. District 4, 154 cases. District 5, 165 cases. District 6, 149 cases. District 7, 979 cases. District 8, 52 cases. District 9, 68 cases. These are the amount of total open cases. They are not the amount of total addresses. The total addresses lessens in some situations by almost 2/3, which seems to be the case in District 3 and some other districts. But because obviously these are repeat offenders. But I just want to know, are these the numbers that we can trust of open cases?
Well, you concerned me with that 5,000 or 3,000 cases, and I'm trying to hurry up and log on to see where you got that from, because I'm not going to comfortably tell you that right there is accurate. I can tell you I don't dig into that software with the amount of options that are available for you to research. And if you found something that we need to address, we will, because I don't like what you just told me about 3,000 cases in one area and 100 in another, because that's not going to quite be accurate.
No, I said I actually said 8,766 cases. I checked it 4 times. The last time I checked it was yesterday. And what I did is I went in by district, because the site provides by district. And then you scroll all the way to the bottom of each district, and it provides you the total addresses and the total of open cases.
I'm going to have to dig into it before I can give you an answer.
Okay.
If I can follow up for you on that.
Not for me.
Well, to add to it, because Mike, we had run into a problem before where you guys, when you took a case to court, you closed it out in the MyGov system, and it was no longer counted, and you also couldn't find it if you were the person or a city council person or a neighborhood person that was wanting to see status. Has that been changed so that those stay in?
No, if we leave those in, there's so many cases that go to court that people aren't here. They're dead, they're in California, whatever, that don't get resolved in court. If we leave those as open, our case log and the management of that case log will be overwhelming, because our inspectors have to go back out and do follow-ups on those and they will continue to do follow-ups as opposed to wait until these people show up to court, get arrested, show up for their subpoena, et cetera. So no, those do not stay as active cases. They're closed until the person is brought before the court, and then we reopen that case.
I know that when that came up before, and I know C-Click Fix is working on this, the staff that work that are working on the issue of just calling something closed without being able to explain where it is. And I thought we had talked about working with MyGov to find some way to leave the data there, but code them that they were in court, so that, for one thing, it didn't cause people to have to call up your inspectors and ask them what the score was on such and such an address. So that's still an outstanding issue. Looks like Mike Siebert has a thought on it.
Just a question, as you're going through the numbers, all I could think was, what percentage of those people are landlords that are having those issues, and what percent are actual homeowners? And what is the possibility of there being a landlord tax for, I want to be, I'm trying to think of the right word to say, but not being a slumlord, I guess, is the only thing I can think of. Because I was in Little Russia yesterday, and a lot of Little Russia has been taken over by people who are landlords that aren't necessarily even in the community. And it used to be a community where, as I was talking to Perupski's, one person trimmed their bushes, everyone trimmed their bushes. One person started painting their house, everyone came and helped. But it was because everyone owned their home and there was community pride within that area. But if you have landlords, and as Mike was saying earlier, that are in California and they're not, owning up to what needs to be done, is it against the rules for the city to have a tax or something that could go outside of the realm of the court system that would be more effective?
May I chime in just a little? A lot of these people that are out of state own the house, and these are our vacant houses, and we do have a vacant registry from it. What we see at court is property owners that are going to court, not landlords. When we're citing the landlords, they own multiple properties, and they don't want to show up to court more than once because the judge starts out pretty cool and he works with them and it's lenient. Well, when that landlord shows up a second, the third, the fourth time, the fines start getting larger and larger. So we're not seeing an over exuberance of landlords versus property owners, and our court system's showing tons and tons of property owners that just physically or financially can't do it.
Thank you. Thank you both.
So, I want to know if before our next meeting, if we need to get verification on that and with the numbers as far as in that us.gov. I actually think that there are probably more cases than that in my district. But just when I saw those numbers, and obviously we know in the southwest side of town, there's probably, going to be less, but that is one of the things that I've wanted to check on.
Let me ask him one more question that's in line with your first round, because I know that they've, over in Public Works, run into this problem. Mike, whenever anybody turns in a code complaint through C-Click Fix, does it get entered in MyGov?
Yes.
Okay. So if anybody in the community really is aware that somebody turned it in that way, we should be able to find it it should appear in MyGov, and we can track it from there.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
Okay. Thinking about the number of issues that we have in code, I stumbled upon, actually, I was researching, and there is just a number of things that I want to bring up that I think we should seriously consider when we're looking at the challenges of how we communicate with people in the community to start caring more about their communities, and the wealth of neighbors and communities care deeply but we know that there are those that do not and somehow have lost an understanding of what it means to live in a neighborhood, right? So this information that I'm going to just be talking about pretty quickly is from Karen L. Black. She is the principal consultant with, let's see, co-founder of Healthy Row House Project. This is about an hour-long series, and she is talking from a perspective of Philadelphia, but she states specifically that she works with much smaller municipalities, small cities, small towns, etc., in relation to their code issues. So I just want to go over a couple of things as we discuss this. Number one, she says, we don't need to accept blight, government, and neighborhood problems. And yes, property owners have rights, yet there needs to be understood that oftentimes that only extends so far until it impacts your neighbor and your neighborhood. Blight does impact neighbors and neighborhoods. Code compliance should be seen as first responders. There should be the move for strategic code enforcement because the status quo is no longer acceptable and can no longer be accepted. Vacant properties cost local government every day, specifically with police and fire. Lost home equity, property values can decrease, she states, up to 30% when in and around vacant and blighted property. However, when addressing vacant and blighted property, there is also much hope. The positives, when blight is reduced, when vacant lots are turned into green vacant lots, it can reduce gun violence by up to 19%, and it can reduce, gun violence by 19, and it can reduce assaults by 39%. Public safety increases. She also stated that a Dr. Charles Bronis conducted a study at the University of Philadelphia where they attached blood pressure monitors to folks that lived in blighted neighborhoods. Once they attached those monitors to their wrist and had them go up and down areas where there was a large amount of blight, they were able to determine scientifically that the blood pressure level rose for all those folks. Once they did the green vacant lot, which is about mandatory to have all, whether it's a vacant lot, vacant house, you are to have windows on the house, you are to have working windows and working doors, and green space, and that when they took those people, same people, back into those areas, their blood pressure increased exponentially. The other thing that she states is that it has to go from a complaint-driven enforcement to a strategic plan to hit all residences, businesses, etc., and to think about the neighborhoods that we are having the most challenges in as to the way that we think of our roads. In other words, the roads here in Topeka, we know, need a number of work and upkeep on them. But we don't just look at one pothole issue in a particular area of street and then say our streets are fixed. We look at the whole thing, and we look at it strategically, and we look at the systemic issues. The other thing that she says that code officers mention time after time across the nation as she's worked with them is that she believes, and many code enforcement officers believe, and this is no disrespect to the judges or the court system, they do not understand the gravity of the situation. And so my thought is, as we go along and continue to look at these issues, You know, to me, a proactive approach would, you know, have our judges take a look at our neighborhoods, have them ride through the neighborhoods and look and see what delays or see what continuing to give homeowners, especially or landlords, especially those that are repeat offenders, just that leeway to where they know they can work the system. And I have heard from code officers in the city that there are a number of folks that know how to work this system. So my way of thinking with being on this committee is to look at everything, all the work that was done last year, but also to look at other ways that we can be proactive and truly understand what is not working and stop trying to do the same thing over and over that we have proof over the years is not working. And also, I believe a time study is needed, because I believe once we do that time study, we're probably going to see that there can always be better efficiencies. But I also believe for some of these most problematic neighborhoods that we need an additional officer or two, a code enforcement officer. Thanks, Chair.
Great. What's interesting is that, of course, the facts are about the same, but you brought up a couple of things that we didn't dwell on. And at the same time, the way we structured what's coming forward is the challenges, and they need solutions. And so some of your research and observations really key into that in a great way, I think.
There's much more, but that's what I just focused on. for now.
No, I appreciate that. No, not meaning, no, it's big, and it's community culture as well as just staff doing code compliance, as you said. And so the challenge was, our inspectors, it's my opinion and observation, so mine, I'll take it only, work their tails off. I can't believe how much they get done, and they do a great job, and they seem to do a pretty thorough job of writing up what they see, and they work, again, in District 1, and we've changed over time, they work reasonably well with the people. They understand that half the people really want things to look better, and the other half are going to defend that they don't have the money or time, and why is somebody picking on them? That's a tough job to do. And Mike has been creative in approach and supportive of his staff, which I appreciate. Yet we are where we are. So the idea was kind of make this team sport to figure out, without necessarily pointing any fingers at anybody, where are the places that we can do a better job, raise that bar in the community. We know that things like community culture and frankly, taking some of the things that are so far down, we're going to need the whole community to help raise that bar, not just staff. And maybe not just through Mike's department. Monique's still on board, for instance. Don't know if Brent's been talking to her, but if you're going to do a community-wide beautification program, when we started this, and I'm just kind of randomly picking out some things. The discussion with prior administration even about having a bulletin board of people who would do odd jobs for people or who could mow and things like that. We have some community resources, but we also have people that live in neighborhoods or that don't do those things often enough to have the resources available. Well, now with Facebook and Nextdoor and so on, lots of people putting out that they're willing to do odd jobs, and they're connected nearby with their neighbors and so on. Maybe it's more of a navigator role that's needed to help make sure that people are connecting up with resources that are out there in social media, rather than us as the city needing to do a bulletin board, for instance. But nonetheless, there's a great concern on the part of everyone that if there are low-income people who are responsible for properties, how do we help them be successful? And is it at a personal level? Is it at a neighborhood level? There's been some discussions that part of our neighborhood building would be to work within our neighborhoods about identifying who needs support on a block and having some teenage kid lined up to go mow Mrs. So-and-so's yard or sweep her porch or whatever is needed. And so kind of jointly, all the way up to code compliance, writing them up and bringing the hammer down and ending up with a judge negotiating extensions after extensions instead of the staff. What's the best way to do this, but with overall the idea that we need to agree on a community standard, which is pretty much in the code, but to review it. And the one item that's kind of come to the top there is reconciling the issue of vegetation, that it is covered and how we're gonna do it and how we're gonna get it current, but looking throughout at what's the most effective and efficient way to do the enforcement itself. But how do we bring up the rear and raise that bar so that there's not as much of a need to do it?
Right, and I think that obviously the point that we want to have always is the friendly and customer-driven approach. And I think that, overall we have that because we know how imperative it's been for this governing body, this council, for customer service to be primary, right? So the thing that I found with listening to some of the meetings and looking over these minutes, LMI folks, I think at times get a bad rap, and I'm not saying it's happening by you, or I'm not saying it's happening by anybody. I'm thinking that oftentimes people think that LMI neighborhoods are just going to be those kind of neighborhoods. And I reject that specifically. I mean, because...
Well, Mike gave a good example, Mike Siebert, just now.
Yeah.
Little Russia.
Yeah, Little Russia, right. Where you have, in Oakland, you have almost 50% are rentals. So I think, rentals definitely are an issue that you started looking at that we have to keep looking at. But I think when it comes to low to moderate income folks, that pejorative sense that they cannot or will not take care of their properties oftentimes I think is used as an excuse because you end up going through these LMI areas and the majority of them are kept wonderfully. Mm-hmm. They work with the minimum. And, when my grandmother was in Mexico and they had no money and they had no floors, but she used to wet the dirt floor and she used to sweep it. But when we're talking about, I think folks that are used to living in a certain manner, again, that don't understand the social responsibility that they have within a neighborhood. So to me, it's not only doing what you've been doing over the past year. We know that code has the customer service, but I really think that there are some deep down digging things that have not been addressed that we need to seriously look at to make more of a working unit that understands what this problem really looks like in Topeka. And I don't know if our judges know what it looks like in Topeka, just to be honest. And so I'm saying as we try for proactive, innovative, thinking outside the box approaches, I think that we should look at everything we can so that we can get on the same page as much as possible. And then, I don't know if it's called rebranding or not, but give the message to Topeka and not only through the NIAs, because we know that a lot of NIAs are floundering to find folks, but that this is something new and improved that we're looking at and all the benefits that can come to them, with property values, with health, with giving good landlords incentives, if that's what it takes. Being more, I don't want to say hammer-like with not good landlords, but something has to be done, especially in our neighborhoods that have such high rental populations.
Well, and I think that's what we did explore through that. Mike Haugen touched on that a little bit earlier. Folklore isn't the right word to use. There's this presumption that the rentals are the problems, the renters are the problems, and the landlords are the problems, but that's not the case. A lot of our worst properties, for those of us that have neighborhoods that are LMI and older, and are homeowners, or they're vacant. And as Mike said, as he's learned the the ropes with code compliance, the landlords don't want to go to court. They're in business for this. And so yes, of course, there are some who are not compliant and are difficult, but for the most part, the landlords have stepped up and they keep their properties at a minimum level, or they will if they get written up. So there's the challenge of knowing exactly who the problem is, but then when you're going to raise the bar, if you're going to do that, that gets into some of the work that I've done and you've been doing directly in your neighborhoods of the neighborhood initiatives. That's not, you've got to work together as a community to do that bar raising, to create the green spaces. Doesn't cost money. You know, we as a city get caught up in what kind of staff do we need and what kind of programs do we need, but keeping your house and keeping your neighborhood trim isn't necessarily costly at all. It's not something, it's rebranding who we are and how we want to look at ourselves. I remember years ago, Mayor Bunton was very concerned about beautification. He was mayor when I first came on the council. And this inner city trip had been to Little Rock, Arkansas. And because he felt like if we have more inspectors, that'll fix it. We'll just need more inspectors. And they had, like, if I recall the report correctly, 31 inspectors. Like, yeah, let's do that. And yet more inspectors wasn't going to solve that root problem. And then a year or two later, and I didn't go on either one of these trips, so hopefully my report is correct. They went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and the town looked great. It was all trim and tidy, no matter what the income levels of the neighborhoods were, and they were so impressed, and they had, kind of fresh off Little Rock, said, so how big is your code compliance department? And the answer was 1. And so again, that branding, that expectation, that community culture. So one of the things you have seen or will see written into this is that one of our goals is that people are going to take care of their property and not need code compliance. If we can get that overall initiative of kind of working both ends against the middle, if you will, so that we work on being as efficient as we can with the cases that we have and as fair, and at the same time bring up the rear with an expectation and self-sufficiency or mutual community sufficiency methods to sustain the properties and the premises regularly. So that kind of a nutshell of putting it together. And one of the things that we ended up discussing as we went along was that Mike was kind enough to point out that part of the stressor for him is that their department isn't the only one that's involved in enforcing some of these issues. Forestry department does a lot of the trimming, and are there some economies there? Are there things where people have learned forestry will come do this that we need to change so that people are again taking responsibility themselves for what's on their alley or on the right of way? Well, that wasn't really something we started looking at. It's engineering that comes out and writes up your sidewalk if it's uneven and has the ADA trip hazards in it. It's fire and police get involved when there's hoarding going on, and that's a big fire danger. It's inside. There's a whole network that helps to work with that. And so identifying what the problems are and making sure that when we come up with this solution, that it's an integrated solution that involves all the players.
So what would that, so you're going to detail what that's going to look like, because it made me think about the doctor's office where for years they've been trying to get all of the hard copies of the patient's care and doctor visits onto the databases, right? So now when you go into St. Francis, you can see all the doctor visits, all the test results and whatever. And I mean, are you thinking about some kind of coordinated database where there is not such a huge disconnect between departments? Because unfortunately, our departments don't always communicate in that way.
That's one of the solutions. And in terms of Mike, primarily it was Mike who was sharing with us the steps that they go through and so on. For instance, we were asking about vegetation, and it turns out the forestry department has a major role that generally people aren't looking at when they're just talking about code compliance. Code compliance has a system of fees and fines and a way to track them and so on. Turned out that forestry's wasn't quite as strong, weren't quite sure what they were doing. So you get this disconnect, yet rather than perhaps, if I'm remembering it right, rather than forestry having to develop their own system of billing and files, maybe it makes sense to have them all in MyGov together. And so that's the kind of thing where we said all these departments need to work together, and where we have had kind of at the staffing level discussions of, well, how could that be? What you're asking for, to kind of talk it through and come up with some ideas, so that we were at a point where the staff was ready to be challenged with solutions, because it seemed like we'd come up with at least some framework for how to address some of those complicated questions. So I don't know what their final response will be, and it will still take some time, but it was exactly that, the idea that perhaps if there was collaboration, the billings could be done all at once. We went through the issues of why it is that there are not only the multiple cases at the same time on a property, as well as sequence of repeat cases on a property. And just the idea that we could write all the violations on a single letter all at the same time and follow up on them. That's not how it's been done. Would that make things more efficient? And there was just some need to process and wrap around the possibilities of how that could work. It might be good to go through the PowerPoint at this point, unless you just want to talk about those issues. I think, okay, good. Mike, did you have anything you wanted to, Mike Haugen, before we proceed with this?
Sure. I just wanted to answer a couple of the comments that
Okay, good.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala but one of them was about more inspectors. And it was me that talked about that it would overload the court system, but that wasn't just a singular thing. It's before we add code inspectors, realize that if we add code inspectors, we add abatements, because they're gonna find more violations. And when they add abatements, that means I have to hire more abatement crew. They're gonna find more grass issues, which means I'm gonna have to hire more people to mow grass, because currently our grass cutting crews, I think they're 40 behind today, but that's because of the rain. So they're running behind. If you wanted to double my grass citations, which I could, because if you drive through the city, you can see them, I got to double my mowing crew. So when you add inspectors, you have to add abatement crew, which means that you have to add trucks, backhoes, equipment. You have to hire more mowing crew, which means more mowers. The tow lot right now is kind of full. The one that we're using, they're not completely full, but if we increased the cars that we tow in, then we got to figure out where we're going to put these cars, because the impound lot, it's not our impound lot anymore, but the private company that's doing it is running out of space as well. And then, yes, court with more housing cases will require more court dates for more people, which will put pressure upon the court staff. I can't speak how much they would need, but I would love to have more code inspectors. If you look at our area map that's assigned, only 2 inspectors work west of Topeka. So the rest of them are all assigned to the east side of Topeka and north Topeka, and they stay just as busy as the ones that have a quarter of the city each. So more inspectors would be nice, but before we do that, we have to make sure that we backfill everything else, which is going to be a nice little chunk of change if we do it. But I'm in complete support of getting more inspectors. I'd love 10 more, but if we do, we got to make sure that we do it in that route.
And
that makes sense?
did you have another point that you wanted to raise, or was that it?
No,
Okay.
I appreciated what you read about Professor Black or Miss Black. I'm not sure how she read, because she's right in the report that she read. And I think that what we have in a lot of neighborhoods is a norm, a community norm of what's okay. And that's what, as a community and as a city, and not just my unit, We need to change the norms within the neighborhoods. The norm within my neighbor had the worst grass on the block. He now has the second best because he started noticing that his was terrible, and that we would tease our neighbor because of how bad it was. And now the norm was to get his grass up to our grass. Ours doesn't even compare to other sides of town, but that just was a norm we needed to change within my neighborhood. So when neighborhoods find it okay to have blight, it's going to get worse and worse. Or if they find it okay to leave the trash can sitting at the curb, everyone starts leaving it out at the curb. That's a norm and a standard that everyone's just grown accustomed to that's not acceptable. We as a community need to find a way to change the norm of blight. And my inspectors push every time that we're going to our community meetings, which 2020 and so far we haven't been going to them, very many of them, is that you're going to get what you tolerate and more. So don't tolerate it. If your neighbor's starting to hoard junk in the backyard, report them. You know, if you can't convince them to clean it themselves with a communication, you turn them in. If you're worried about retaliation, your choice is either have an angry neighbor or have junk in the backyard. But don't tolerate blight, and you can start to see the norm within your community change.
Thanks for that, Mike. And I think too, as we move forward, I really believe we're going to have to look at an outreach approach, again, beyond social media. And I know NIAs are challenging, but some way to creatively think, how can we get the proactive side of how not having continual neighborhood code enforcement issues, how it has been shown to actually improve your health, right. How it may even make for happier neighbors, how it decreases crime, how it decreases gun violence, how it raises the property values, how all of these things. I'm thinking, how can we start communicating that to folks as we go about, which is exactly what we need to do, which is to become more consistent, to deal with these issues directly, to not blink, to, for us as elected officials to take the ownership of this, but also for the neighborhoods to take ownership of it themselves. And I'm going to say what I said again at, I think, the second to the last council meeting. We know some of this is driven by COVID, this lack of apathy that you see in many neighborhoods about they are hesitant to call TPD, they're hesitant to call code enforcement, they don't want to be told that, they're the ones that have called, even though code enforcement doesn't do that. You're seeing low attendance at NIAs, which hopefully will, start gaining in attendance. But I think that the year of COVID is not only kicked everybody's butt, everything that's added on to this, to me, the complacency and the apathy in some of the neighborhoods that I walk and talk with people, it is like, it has like a giving up feeling, like nothing's gonna change. And so how are we as a city utilizing the customer service that we need to focus on more and more, a rebranding if necessary, along with the changes that are right there, pointed out, bullet pointed, and change whatever ordinance or however we need to do that. But it's going to.
And I want to compliment you because you've been acting on what you believe. And for those who don't know, Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala has been a big driver in getting a big community garden going and getting people organized in Oakland. I think for me, and this is part of what we've been talking through all the time, is that Mike has talked about, well, if I need more inspectors, I need more abatement. There's this assumption that the city is responsible to abate. And when I talk to people, I say, you know what? You're paying for it. We're not collecting the money back. Is that what you want? Well, no. And so part of what this proposal is that we'll go through, and that the conversations we've been having really for the last year are, how do we get the community to do that rebranding and to raise that bar and take care of itself? So Mike doesn't need more inspectors. Mike's not faced with the issue of more abatements that aren't paid for. And because if unwittingly, we have created the culture that, well, if you just wait, the city will come, the city will write it up, you don't have to talk to them, the city will write them up, and then the city will take care of it. We haven't built that community ownership. We haven't built anything sustainable in the community. We've had good intentions, but it's not giving us the results that we need. And so if what we need is to certainly support and look at efficiencies in the code compliance department and the collaboration with the other departments, but correspondingly at the same time, do that community building to raise that standard to be sustainable by the community itself, not by code, not by the taxpayers paying the bill for somebody to get mowed twice a year, because that's as often as we can get out there, which then makes it look like that's what our community standard is. So we've kind of explored that catch-22 that with good customer service and which our staff is, in my opinion, really great at. But what that means is the neighbors are frustrated because it's taking forever for so-and-so to get their house fixed. And so we need to sync up the messaging on that. You and I individually end up doing that by exploring the cases and talking to people and getting it worked out. But the more that we can do that so that that's built into those blocks and the neighborhoods and doesn't require you or me or Mike and his 10 people, that was what we were trying to frame out here.
Got it.
And so they're big, hairy challenges that aren't just immediate staff, but we wanted to create what some fundamentals were. And so let's go back, and we don't need to dwell on this a whole lot at this point because we've had some really great discussion. But Molly or whoever would bring back the PowerPoint. There we go. So in short, it seemed like we needed to set some ground assumptions of what were important to us. And so the beginning of that is just, what are the goals? And if the goals are that we want people to be safe, we want structures to be protected, and we want to maintain an attractive environment and property values. Maybe we need more than that, but it seemed that we needed to start with some fundamentals that were important so that then when we looked back at what actions we needed to take and why we were doing, we could always go back to these are our fundamental beliefs and goals. And so we set those goals as community goals, or those are out there in the proposal for community goals. And then the next slide talks about the operational goals, that we want what we do to be straightforward, kind, and fair, to have it be cost effective, and to have it be fully integrated with other departments and services. So it might be services outside the city and so on as well. Trash pickup, for instance, which we don't do. So again, those need to be the agreed principles. We looked at what departments are currently involved in our various property and premises issues, and then looked at who maybe should be involved. So we currently have property maintenance, forestry, engineering, fire, police, and zoning. Zoning does signs, appropriate property uses, businesses and properties, and so on. But we talked about the executive level. City manager has gotten personally very involved, but we need to look at how this fits in with our whole city and our branding of who we are. We need that top level involved. Community engagement, if we're going to work on community-wide initiatives to raise that bar and to work with the association neighborhood groups, be they organized or not, do the study with people like the gal that you read from and sit down and bring those principles. I know that Susan McClarty, who's recently been elected head of the CAC, is studying Bill Barberger's stuff all the time and trying to really research and bring ideas to the table as well. I imagine other people are or would. We need to light that fire, arguably. Development Services certainly does the other permitting and so on. KDOT, that has to do with particularly gateways to our city and the fact that they don't mow regularly, and people are very concerned about, again, that branding of our city and how it looks when somebody drives in to Topeka / the capital city, and how that affects our own self-image of our community and so on, and our confidence that we can raise the bar, neighborhood associations, others. Part of the others discussion, and we may or may not talk about it much today, was that, for instance, if we need to do some community-wide initiatives to get the vegetation where we want it to be, or exterior paint, there's a whole lot of people that are not interested in going to meetings, but would love to, but this is a great community for volunteering, whether it's at a neighborhood basis, a church basis, community-wide basis, so that all those folks might be included in, quote, others. So we worked on an aspirational goal overall. The print document that you've had, the 2-page document, has more words than this one does in it, but I thought Liz did a good job of shaking this down. There are 3 pieces to this: to bring up the quality of structures and premises so that structures and premises violations are the exception rather than the rule. That our number of substandard properties is never over 500. And that owners are motivated to take care of properties before city enforcement departments are even called. That being the aspirational goal, what we're trying to do with then these more specific sub-goals and objectives. So there are basically 4 subsets in the challenges. One is to reduce the current substandard structures by 50% within 5 years. Part of the challenge, and we can talk about it today and later, is what's that number? What's our starting number? Is it that 10,000 that you got out of counting what was on there, or 2/3 of that is 4,000? What's our starting number? Reduce deterioration in vacant structures. How do we do that? So that they don't have to be demoed, so they can be saved and reoccupied. 3rd, reduce the expense and revenue gap on abatement cases by 50%. What we learned in studying is that talking about we need more people and we need more abatement is fine, but we are billing out $1 million a year and only collecting $500,000. Yo, okay, and this is, which means we literally are asking that if we continue the road we've been on, what we're asking is the taxpayers to pay more and more to babysit everybody else in town. And so it was important to spend the time on this to say, let's make sure we know how we want this to be when we end up, so that the steps that we take are moving toward that self-sufficiency and rebranding, not just having everybody wait for the city to come out and take care of it, if you will.
And I think that messaging is also important, the way you're putting it. When all these costs, you are paying for this. This is all tax dollars. What, we're, collecting from you goes back out, and this is what you're paying to help your neighbors because they're not keeping their.
Well, you and I both probably had the situation where somebody in the neighborhood comes up to you and says, hey, the city did such a crummy job. Why didn't they trim? I'm like, what?
Yeah, I have had that.
You're paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the 4, I guess maybe I didn't read the 4th one, but improving the community appearance through management of uncultivated and overgrown vegetation. At this juncture, for the last number of years, the staff's interpretation has been that anything over 12 inches wasn't covered. If it turned into long vines or shrubs or trees, that code didn't cover it. And it was because of this assumption that we needed to abate it, so they weren't writing it up. And so then we had this big mess. And so we've kind of gone back and forth about it. In the course of the committee hearings, we learned that in fact the TMC does require on rights of way that the owners take responsibility, but right now forestry is doing it for them. And so we needed to reconcile the two. First, decide what our community standard was, and if being overgrown on sidewalks and parking and foundations and fence lines and so on isn't okay, then it wasn't so much, but this is how much it will cost. It was, okay, how do we get to yes on this? What's our standard and how do we get there? And so that's where the detail on these 4 was again, stubbed in. So So the reduction in the number of substandard structures, again, these are the challenges. These aren't the staff answers to how they would do it, but the challenge was establish a single visit complete inspection system. So that 2/3 that you saw, and the repeats that you saw get drilled back. Let's get inside. The staff has really improved on this over time, even before we started having these meetings last year, but in the course as well of getting, they don't do many interiors right now at all. There have been reasons of not to go inside that we need to address, and again, rebrand that of course we're going to go inside and we're going to see what's there, because you need to live in a safe place and your neighbors need to be safe, that sort of thing. But also these multiple or sequential inspections, even on an interior or an exterior, are very costly. They're very hard on the owners themselves. We all do better typically with one list that we then figure out how we're going to address. Then as soon as we get 3 things done, we get another 3. And we feel like we're never gonna succeed. Those were conversations that have been going on along. Certainly, the staff has been committed to allowing extensions on people who are actively working on issues. That maybe if not today, then some other time. It has been interesting to learn how the staff has currently built the system. There are many, many steps in our system for getting the inspection if you disagree with something, and then who can give you an extension. It was really only, well, it's been more than 20 years ago now, but back in the proverbial day, there was the whole city, the county had code compliance when I first started working in code compliance and tenant landlord in this town. They had 3 inspectors and a supervisor, and they reported to the head of the health department. And the town looked good, and they got out and got all the inspections done. The problem there was that the courts were not working in terms of there being a hammer when people got there. And so things began to slip. But it was that supervisor and then the health department director who could make the final decisions. So it was fast and one step from the inspectors. At this point, we have inspectors that go to the supervisor. Then 20-some years ago, when we revamped the code in the 80s, the thought there was to be kinder and gentler. We wanted these really tough laws, but then added an administrative judge over the supervisor, and then it still can go to court after that. So we have many, many layers. Whether we need them all or not, we need to figure it out. That's a place that could be reviewed. But who gets to allow that extension? Overall, it seems that right now people think that if they know the story, that the extensions are pretty reasonable, even though it takes time. But again, that can be revisited again. And certainly activate the section in the code that allows for courtesy inspections. And we talked about that back and forth about how to do it, that the staff can share. They were concerned about it at first, but we have, for instance, have the code online so you can read it yourself, and everybody is consistent in enforcement, and you can call up and say, well, it looks to me like there's this and this. If you came out and looked at it, what would you say? So that people can, again, take care of things preventively themselves without it costing time. Talked about those sorts of ways to work together. To establish then processes and consequences. That's obviously, we have some of those, so it's revisiting those to see if there are better ways that we can do them, and also introducing the idea of community-wide campaigns. To reduce deterioration in vacant structures, that started out with some pretty big asks on the part of staff. I personally would still like to see us figure out how to look at roofs no matter what. So it's not just the roof you can see from the street, but any of them, because that's what damages a vacant structure the worst. Anyway, what we kind of worked out, and is reflected here in these bullets, is to simply do education with owners of vacant property about how to properly, quote, mothball a property, to make it available through staff, to have it on websites, if we're still doing the vacant property thing, to have those vacant property registration folks just send it out with their letters and have people be available to help people secure them properly.
The vacant property, those were the letters that had gone out that,
That's where the city wanted to do the property registration
so
on every single.
that's still not happened yet, right? There's a hold on that, is that correct?
It's, we're following up on those that were sent and addressing them individually with staff under Mike Haugen, and then from there, making follow-up determinations if they're really truly should have received a vacant notice or not. And then in the future, if someone says that a property is vacant, it will be handled by Mike's staff versus going through ProChamps. So we're not stopping the vacant registry program, but we are curtailing it in the sense of it's not a blanket effort that is done without investigation. We're making sure that the property truly is vacant by actually going out and checking it and doing all of the steps that should have been done with the last set of letters.
And ProChamps is still involved?
ProChamps is only involved in our foreclosure process now, not our vacant registry process.
And when is there anticipation that the registry will be, I don't know, complete or wherever?
Cleansed. I don't know the exact time frame. I don't know how far along Mike has got in going through that list. Mike, do you have any idea?
Yeah, we're going slow with it because we're adding it into the inspector's duties. But there was 1,488 letters sent out. A lot of those are just vacant lots. Those are going to be easy ones to clear out. But we're sending inspectors out with their colo to look into the ones that were sent out. If they can guarantee and they can show that it's vacant, we then send another notice to the property owner saying, hey, you need to register with the city. When we'll get caught up with the 1,400, I can't give you an answer on that. It's when we do, but we're moving forward with it. I mean, we don't need to hold ourselves back with the 1,400. We are actually doing vacant registry now as we identify them, but we're intentionally going out to those properties that ProChamps notified and doing it. But our inspectors are confirming that they're vacant, or at least believe that they're vacant before we send a letter. There's gonna be properties we think are vacant that just aren't, but that everything indicates they are. One of the things we're finding a lot is they don't have water. So then we have a different problem because it isn't vacant, but there's no water. So then we have to cite it for lacking water. But we won't know that until the people reach out and say, hey, I live here, I just don't have water.
Okay, do you have any idea how many you've done out of the 1,488?
Just calling, asking me cold right now, no.
Can we get that? Not right now, I mean at the next
Good.
meeting.
Yeah.
We need to do an update.
Okay,
And I might have it before the meeting's over.
okay. You know, when you talk about this in the vacant structures, again, I keep going back to what is the possibility that we talk further about one of the ideas that they had with these structures, instead of boarding up the windows and the doors, to have working windows and doors. And I know there's probably gonna be, we can't do that because then, you know, people are gonna come and break them, but there still has to be the ability for dialogue on it.
I agree, and that's why we were gonna walk through these, why we drilled back. We'd had all this back and forth. There's a ton of stuff that we went through to talk about these things in the last 6 months. Didn't come up with all the answers, but it seemed that at this juncture to say, we want to establish procedures, advise owners of long-term soon-to-be vacant structures. And if there's, again, back to that branding and the standard, yes. I mean, there was a point only a couple of years ago where our compliance staff, I guess with this vacant property ordinance, wanted to put a sign this big on the front door that said, this is a vacant property. People like me are going, no, that's a bullseye. And so is boarding, depending on how it's done. And so if, we'll see what the staff would bring back on this, But the idea is that there would be a conversation between us and staff about what their steps were and any details to sort of flesh it out, and that we would actually take it out to get comments rather than just complaints on what's wrong, comments about the standards that we're proposing here and the staff's proposals on how to resolve these issues, how to take action, so that the input we get is on how to fix it rather than what's wrong.
Right.
And so the ideas yeah, I mean, I've done research like you're talking about too, having the glass instead of boarding makes it look less vacant. And so requiring that it be boarded.
But even what it's shown, and again, I understand that this particular study that I was referencing is in Philadelphia, but still, the
Well-
reduction in assaults,
Exactly.
the reduction in gun violence.
Well, it's the broken window theory, and
It is.
nicely boarded is better than not nicely boarded.
Yes, but let's
But-
look at options.
Exactly.
All the options.
And so I think we can talk about that further, and if when you see this, you think that we need to have, this just says reduce deterioration, but the idea is that the vacant structures are not intrusive. When this was proposed, and everybody knows I had some problems with the vacant structures ordinance, it's because there are many, many properties that are vacant for years that are just kind of part of the wallpaper, haven't been a problem. And then others certainly that have. And so to study, what was it that, and so the security certainly, and one of the things we talked about with the second bullet, establish strategy to optimize vacant structure security. Some of the conversation was, well, do we need something kind of like the fire department has or the security system thing where you get one free visit if the alarm goes off, but other than that, it's $50 a shot, so that you're discouraged from having your alarm go off, having false alarms, or having problems in your property. And we can go over it again, but have been assured that between the police department and code compliance, there are fines if the property isn't secured, and they have to pay if we have to secure it.
Yes,
So just making sure.
And because of the number, I'm just gonna be really blunt here, because of the high number of meth issues that we have in District 2, in Oakland and North Topeka, because of issues where we have folks that allegedly are on meth that don't want to be involved in going to shelters, they don't want to be involved going to the mission, and so they find vacant structures to go into. And I believe that it does have to, it's so important that we get TPD to work with us on this, because sometimes you have no idea who's hiding out in there. And one thing that we are looking at in Oakland and North Topeka is that there are a handful of individuals that appear to be perhaps taking advantage of some of this vacant housing, and just a handful, and have created a sense of not safe at all neighbors within their own neighborhood. So this is, this is very serious.
But
in that
drilling back to those original objectives, the deal is that our goal should be that the owner of those properties
Exactly.
is keeping them secure.
Exactly.
Not that, and again, with the best of intentions, we've taken sort of this responsibility on ourselves.
No,
But
don't agree
if we
with
can
you.
build in strategies optimally, I mean, as much as
Yes.
we can.
yes.
One of the worst problems we have, though, is finding an owner. We have properties where the owner dies, and the heirs come forward. And so ultimately, I believe it's our responsibility that if there is no recourse against the owner based on either can't find the owner, et cetera, that we need to secure the property in order to
Oh,
assure
sure.
it stops.
Yes.
And so that goes to a common situation that we find within the community. The same is true of the abatements, the mowings, and those types of things. And the help is with the vacant registry, that helps to solve at least having a contact person, so that if an issue occurs on that property, also when those individuals go into the property, being able to know who to call, asking them will they press charges on the person
Yes.
that's there, because if they won't press charges, then we can't do anything other than release them, get them out of the house and release them. without even being able to write a fine, a ticket for that trespassing. And so the vacant registry will help us with hopefully gaining some ownership information that will help when those other issues come up. And that's part of the reason why we don't want to get away from the complete implementation of vacant registry, because it still has a role that can be helpful for us.
Oh, I agree completely on that, so.
But we needed to do that anyway. I mean, you
Yes.
can't send a code compliance letter if you can't, we have to find owners, and the ones we have the most problems with are not stepping up to sign the registry because they're not
Yes.
paying attention or they're not there.
Which-
Well, we don't have that many, and so again, this established the strategy was, what's that
Yes.
strategy gonna be? How are we gonna capture them all? How can we optimize owner responsibility?
Oh, I agree.
And
The more
some
we
of
can
that
get
includes
by
working
owners,
with the
better.
county to get the tax sales sped up. And, there's all kinds of strategies that can come under each one of these. This was, what are we trying to do?
I agree.
So that, between, again, the staff's been involved in a lot of conversations on it, but one way or another to be able to, the committee's had input so far. The public always has some great ideas that people haven't thought of too, or a different spin, but to get it going, after this much time, let the staff say, well, here's how we think we can get started.
Yeah.
So on the expense revenue gap, that first bullet is to reduce on abatement cases. Maybe there are not enough words in that sentence, but to take that $500,000 split and get it to zero. How can we do that? And that could be anything from not having to inspect them and abate them in the first place so that we're just not doing as many, down to how do we do a better job at collecting on what the bills are. We've
But-
talked.
One
Go
thing
ahead.
I'd like to add though on that though is that I do believe the public expects us to abate if we cannot get the owner to abate. I mean, they expect that they would not have a junk pile next to their house. And so therefore, at some point, after all efforts are exhausted to get the owner to do it, we have to do it. And so we're always going to have amount of these costs. And they go to court, and we put them through to the collection agencies, we put it on the taxes when we can. We do those efforts, but unfortunately not a majority will pay. And that's why we have this gap. Maybe that'll change, and we'll try and find a way to help to make that happen. But I'm always going to abate eventually, and we're going to have to absorb that cost.
I would agree with the most egregious cases on that as well.
Yeah.
And, I would just say, I honestly get very frustrated with, having been in office a year and a half, and I started working on, and I know COVID got in the way of some of this, but some code issues back from like the second or third week, some zoning issues where people are junking up their yards and they're not even zoned for what they're trying to do in there, for some really just terrible hoarding and collecting and all of this thing, and trying to get that abated and moved through that process. And, a year and a half later, I just have so many cases myself open because the movement is so slow. And I don't know.
Yeah, and I
how
think
we
that's part of also what we hear. We try to be working with the individual to make it happen.
I know.
And so often, if we don't do that, then you end up hearing that code enforcement is being unfair and unrealistic, and how can I ever accomplish this? And so that's the other part that we hear. Now, as time has gone on, patience for that type of response has waned, and so we have been ratcheting down our length of time and our amount of consideration of those kind of issues.
But, and part of what's down here too then is how to establish that system and culture that the owner's responsible. Some of the conversations have included the fact that because we've been abatement oriented, the staff has felt like they couldn't write up somebody who hadn't mowed a week after, if they just plain still hadn't mowed, that they couldn't do it till the city had mowed. And I think we're pretty far down the line, for instance, of saying, no, you go out there today, the way our code is set up is you can be charged up to $499 or 180 days in jail per day per violation of anything in the city's TMC, just about, or those that reflect that section. And so being able to make it a little less convenient, I mean, we and other cities worked on being able to just do one notice a season on grass so that we didn't have to keep sending certified letters and so on. Yet on the other hand, if that means that I'm a property owner and I can just say, well, shoot, let them send all the letters they want, or them not send a letter, whatever, let them mow it as often as they want, I'll pay the bill when I get my taxes and I'm done. I had somebody tell me once they were running a tab with the city. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
And so being able to look at what's the patterns that have emerged with
Right.
some
Yeah.
and figure
That's
out how to
important.
pinch it off. And then similarly, having that referral system in place so that the people who really are inexperienced or in poor or not physically able to do it themselves and don't seem to have resources, that we can either support them on a neighborhood block basis or a city basis to get whatever they need to take care of it themselves. So it's not us the next
Right.
time.
So I had, just to interject this, I've been having a number of conversations with Lizone. And so we were talking about East Topeka Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And is that what it's called?
Washburn Tech East,
Washburn Tech East.
whatever.
And so, you know, I know that that's not in my district, but this is an example. So you have training for, you know, maybe mechanics or I don't know what all programs they have in there. But possibly think about part of that training when they are going into the classroom or whatever, then going into their community as part of internship hours or whatever and helping with code issues as internship hours. And when Lizone told me that, I'm like, that's the kind of thing that's the kind of thing we need to be looking at.
Right, and Mike has been stressed because we've lost at least one of our inmate crews, and what they've discovered most recently is that they're getting popular enough that we're getting outbid on what we would pay. And so, but the model, which is what you're talking about, of organizing folks that can, I've watched them work. It's like a Chinese fire drill, you know, the van pulls up, they all hop out, they grab their lawnmowers, they go zzz, and they hop back in and go to the next spot. But it can't be done. And we've seen a lot of stuff about hiring street people and so on. There are a lot of models that people have worked around the country as well. So the idea then was, let's come up with so that there are resources and options at the various levels, the people that just aren't doing it, how do we pinch that off? The people that can't do it, how do we develop a resource network in the community that again will sustain itself? And who would
Right.
manage it? How do we do
And
that?
that has to come from the neighborhoods, you know, that those ideas have to come from, for the most part. I
Right.
mean, you can kind of light a fire a little bit, but it's gonna have to come from them,
Right.
which is why I keep going back to the importance of strengthening the NIAs, you know, that are thinking in these creative ways with drawing more people in to maybe creating these initiatives,
Right.
you know, and as we try to, I mean, in District 2, what we're trying to do is reinvigorate the neighborhood watch, you know, again, that investment that folks have in their community. And what I am seeing, I'm just going to reiterate this, and so this is going to be the challenge, is a sense of, at times, apathy, or it's not going to work, or it's too late for our community, or no one's caring, or whatever. Well, we start by caring right here within our own neighborhoods. That's how we started, and then it moves out.
And see, I think that's where we just start working together and it's not limited to code compliance all of a sudden. It's not all on Mike's head. That gets out to, hopefully, and again, through the neighborhood initiatives, and the dreams work and conversations on that score, that the community engagement staff would be way more than grant administrators as they've been before, but would be able to help. If we already have people that could do that could help, because it's really not you and I's role to do it, but we do it. Or if there are other ways that we can work on empowering and growing from the grassroots up, or managing these citywide
Right.
initiatives or training initiatives and so on.
Right, and
A lot
that's
of
how I
options.
see it, is just nurturing it so it can grow.
Yeah.
Not for us to, we can't lead the whole thing. It has
Exactly.
to be from the neighborhood, so I would agree.
Can I, Mike, this area is obviously something that is very, the procedures and so forth. And I would just ask that Mike had any comments that he wanted to make regarding this particular area.
Just a few things that I caught, Chairwoman Hiller, when we were talking about the grass and your envisionment of just going back in 7 days and cited state law, which reflects directly back to us, requires that the city mow the property that we cite if they don't. The word is shall, and it is right in the state law. So I have no option when I cite a property, if you elect not to mow it, to go mow it. So I have to be pretty careful, and we have to be pretty careful, like with strategy number 4, you put more abatement responsibilities on our department. Anything we cite, we're mowing and cleaning up. We can't just keep citing the person $150 or $1,500 or whatever it is. So that.
Well, we may
that goes-
need to change the state law, because that's a big burden on cities, and look what it's done for us.
Yep, if you can get that, because that's for vegetation, vehicles, and grass. It says that we will provide an opportunity for the tenant or landlord, the owner, to correct the violation. We have to give them notice. They have to have time to correct the violation, and then if they don't correct it, we shall abate it. So a lot of the laws allow for the individual to correct the violation. And I don't know when it's changed, but our community has went from just a handful of scrappers throughout the city to a whole army of scrappers within this city. And you see them riding the bikes with the wagons. And I only used to see them in certain neighborhoods. I'm seeing them in the entire city riding a bike with a trailer and loading up scrap. And then they're taking it back to their property, stripping it down, burning it, doing whatever they want. And then they sit on the metal until the price of metal goes up. So we got all these yards that we're dealing with it. I wasn't a problem 10 years ago. There was only a handful. You even knew who was scrapping back then. I could have told you Jimmy, Steve, and Larry. Now it's all over. It's just the way to make money if you're not working.
Just let me interject. When you're talking about potentially should be involved in current and potential departments, you have executives, community engagement, development services, KDOT, neighborhood association, others. Immediately, what I thought is, offer something, an invitation to the state legislators of the area or to the county commission, because they're the ones that are going to be able to impact changes that we need to see. I know that's a far reach, but at least it's trying to collaborate.
Well, and I think you're right. That's part of what we spent this 6 months talking through, because the last time we talked, I knew that our code didn't require us to abate anything. It gives us the ability to abate anything, but not the requirement, and we'd made choices along the way. But it sounds like Mike has done some research, but if what we're doing is trying to figure out how to get to yes on all of our goals, if that involves changing, getting tax sales more often, or, helping the county figure out how to streamline it. I know they were thinking about trying to do some online. And don't know if that's come to fruition, but all those things and the impact, and if the state law is requiring us to do stuff, which means we're not writing people up as often as we need to get the consequences that we want, then we think it through, talk it through, and maybe go ask for a change.
And that's partly, like, for example, the abandoned houses, we asked for a change and that got thwarted on us, and we weren't able to get that through after multiple tries, and we haven't pursued it. We've looked for opportunities, but none have come up for us to be able to pursue that. But it is still there. But yes, we can look at legislative changes. We can identify the issues that we're having that maybe are affecting our ability to do better at this, then we can bring them forward.
Well, and we're active in the League of Kansas Municipalities. Mike and his staff are involved, Mike in particular, in some networks for code compliance, so it's a way to network with other resources.
But I think, one thing that we did look at, and I think this is true, Mike, we looked at the possibility that we can do increased fines once we have found them guilty, abated, and then need to go back again, we can increase the fines. That is accurate.
How our city code reads, annually, if we go back a second time, we bump the fines up another $100. Just
Right.
that's it. So that the third one's not increasing, it's just that $100. So there's an administrative fee or penalty of $100, and the second time we go out there, it's $200. What we charge is outlined in our city code for these. I got no problem with increasing fines or penalties, but I'm deeply concerned of who we're really impacting. When I am increasing fines upon it's not a good feeling in my stomach to inform them they now owe $700. But I don't have the solution for you on that. There's plenty of people who can pay the fines that they need to pay, and I don't care. They need to pay them. But I know that most of the people that are calling me are broke.
But that's why we talk so much about providing the resource lists, right, Mike, for so that they could take care of it themselves this time and in the future.
And we do, and we knock on doors and hold conversations with these people and ask them to fix it. That norm that I talked about and the hoarding and the collection of stuff is just so different than it used to be. And I don't have that, and the concern for what your neighbor thinks of you is nowhere near what it was in the 70s and maybe even the 80s, definitely the 50s and 60s, but we're in the 20s now. We're in a whole, people aren't as concerned with what people think of them, and their neighborhood is no longer just their neighborhood. Our neighborhoods now extend all the way out to Wanamaker if you live east, because you have transportation. We are going everywhere. We're going to the movies out west. People out west are going to Lawrence to eat. Our neighborhood is no longer the neighborhood that we envisioned from when we were young. It's not the same thing. Plus, we have two parent working households. It's not the same. So to find that solution, this is a nationwide issue. It's not a Topeka issue. And if we can solve this, we can go on the road teaching cities all day long. Because my code enforcement issues are a national problem. You can go to any city in the shy of the really rich towns in Kansas, got the same problems that we have, including Lawrence. You may think, go to the poor neighborhoods in Lawrence and they got the same issues that we have. It's a national issue, and I am trying my best to find a solution so that I can share it with the nation.
Isn't there any models out there that we can look at with, these trips? Isn't there just something in the paper about
Intercity.
GTP's trip to Arkansas or wherever? But isn't there models out there that we can aspire to that have worked, even if it's taken years to get there when it comes to code enforcement and bolstering neighborhoods again?
So most of the models and presentations that I have been a part of are in cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, whatever. Go look at that city. Baltimore is not the nicest city when it comes to code enforcement, but they will put up a story and a program that they say is working wonders. And it really might be for a 3-city block area, and that they've done this. Is it for a complete Baltimore? No. Could we target, when I came up with the concept of Team Up to Clean Up, it was to target specific small neighborhoods with exactly what you're saying, to be proactive as citizens and city government. Government do what we're supposed to do, but get the community involved. Some of it's working great, some of it the communities walk away from it when we're done. And as you spoke about the NIAs that are struggling, you do need to have somebody within that community, the NIA or what have you, that is the leader of that. Because individuals aren't going to just change overnight. They're gonna need the support. I've had something running through my head that if I have a strong NIA that wants to run with it, to where they actually do some proactive code enforcement themselves, and instead of contacting us, send a team-oriented letter to the people, say, hey, we noticed that your house needs paint. In our community, here's the resources we can help you with. Would you please consider it? We're not associated with code enforcement. We're not turning you into code enforcement, but as a neighbor, what do you need to get your house into compliance? Return in 6 months. If the house isn't painted, then send another note. Go, can we meet with you and talk to you? Let's find out why you don't care to fix your house. You might find out they're in a wheelchair and they can't do it and they have no children. And then the community can then step up and help them. And then if finally they find out the people just don't care, then you notify code enforcement. But code enforcement may have already cited the property because we're out there doing proactive stuff. But if we had, I'm looking at that concept saying that would change the norm in a neighborhood when we're reaching out as the neighbors and not trying to be nitpicky and complain that your hedges are too tall or whatever, but true code violations that create blight within the neighborhood. I just don't have an NIA I've brought it up to probably 4 or 5. No one's shown interest, but it's also just a concept at this time. But
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's a good concept, but with the NIAs that I have in my district, I don't see anybody's, save a new NIA board that's popping up, but I don't even know if they would. And because that is really asking a lot. I think what's happened is that sense of volunteerism, that sense of getting out and getting to know your neighbors, is something that we're losing more and more. And again, this isn't just issues that we're having right here. These are systemic issues within communities that are leading up to this point. The large amount of rentals, people not being able to make enough money to do this. We have so many elders on extraordinarily tight incomes. So all of these are going to end up manifesting in different ways. And I think that what we're seeing is we're seeing how it's manifesting in the, in our communities. I mean, just intimately in our communities, in our neighborhoods. And I don't know. I always think to myself, we're a city of 127,000 or so. We should be able to do this. But I think the continued conversation, the intention of putting it in the right direction, and really trying to establish a plan that encourages neighborhoods to start taking up for themselves in a more proactive way than what they've done before. But I'm just going to be honest in that too. When we look at possibly NIAs, if you did have an NIA that wanted to go door to door, in some of these neighborhoods, and I'll use Oakland as an example, some folks are afraid to go door to door. They're afraid to go door to door with these code houses because they don't know who's going to be opening up the door and on the other side. And that has to do with issues of crime, with issues of drug houses, with issues of the ones that do not want to be part of finding an answer for homelessness and the street people that we have walking around. So I think, honestly, to be honest with ourselves on this committee, that when we look at these changes to code enforcement and, property maintenance and wanting to encourage our communities, we also have to look at the multiplicity of issues that they're dealing with besides this.
Well, and once again, that gets back to community policing, which we're going back and forth about too, I guess. But I've had neighborhoods that had really great success when our community officers would walk with them. And what they said was that, what both parties said was that the officers felt like when they went with the neighborhood folks, people who wouldn't have answered the door just for them did answer the door because the neighborhood person was there. And then correspondingly, that got the neighborhood person comfortable with knocking on the door because they maybe just aren't usually that outgoing anyway and or were nervous. And so having the community officer whom they knew and who knew others in the neighborhood wasn't just a stranger but knew people was part of that. And so again, that's why as we ultimately put out these and kind of beat on these possible fundamental goals and so on. There could be all sorts of folks involved. It's not just Mike
Yeah.
and his guys and code
Right.
compliance.
It has to be, and
It's
it's
a-
intersectional. This
Exactly.
is all intersectional.
Exactly. We're getting close to noon, I think we're past noon, so this is the kind of conversation we needed to have to kind of review and refresh and get you engaged in this for sure. The last of the four was improving appearance, of course, and that's primarily vegetation. There's a fair amount of detail on that. We've touched on some of it already. I'm happy to stay longer if you want, but if we're ready to kind of say, all right, if we want to, we could either vote or not vote, but take this as it is, or this document that has a little more wording in it, but this represents it, and do a challenge out to the staff to give us a response on what their action plan and proposals would be. We can do that out of this meeting, have them get it to us within a week or two, within 2 weeks, so that we have time to look at it before our next meeting, consider it our next meeting, and if we think we're ready, take it on the road for public input. If you, particularly you, want more time and think that maybe we would want to tweak some of this before we would give it to staff, we can do that as well.
I would, in addition to having Neil here.
Okay. Well
I want to
then,
know. Could I ask of you to reconsider the word substandard? As I've asked all city staff, what our definition of substandard, or do we have an actual number of substandard housing? We don't, and the word substandards means houses that are unsafe to live in. We can knock that out because there's not a ton that are unsafe to live in. I don't think that's what you're after. I think you're after something bigger than just the houses that are unsafe. When I contacted the county, I messed up a little. I have a county appraiser to provide me with properties that, as I reread it, they only provided me with poor, how did I lose that? These three, poor, below poor, or unacceptable. Well, they have average and below average and all other ratings, because I think I only got like 350 houses, and that's not enough. So I've re-asked the county appraiser to give me everything that is below average and see if that number significantly increases on houses. Because if we can put a real number to that, then I can set a goal. If I don't have a number, I'll never accomplish the goal. And I'm excited to actually personally address every single house that the appraiser says is below average, that we touch every single one of those for any violation that we can see.
and of course, the county is still complicated, if you will, by the fact that all they're doing is looking at the outside.
Sure, and when I was talking to the county appraiser, he said, a unique problem I'm having, and I'm gonna pat myself on the back on this, he goes, you're citing so many properties and forcing them to clean up the outside of it, that when we raise their taxes, they're appealing it with the argument, we put the lipstick on to get code enforcement off our rear, but the inside of the house is no good. So I don't think that my house is worth $150,000. So even the county is noticing that we are citing a lot of people, and they said that it feels like we're doing blitzes in neighborhoods. We're not doing any blitz or anything. Our team up to clean up the Central Park and the other and historic Old Town and those. I guess I mean, we focused on every single property in there,
That's a
but
blitz.
they're saying,
You just did Kenwood.
yeah, and
That's a blitz.
well, but we didn't hit every house in Kenwood either. It wasn't a blitz, but that's how they feel. The appraiser feels that we have been citing the heck out of it and making it more difficult for them to effectively appraise the value of a house. So I think that's a good accomplishment on our part. Plus, I can't force a homeowner to have nice carpet, etc. If he lives in the house, he's going to live in it how he wants.
Well, we just added another player, obviously, in the conversation, because it touches a lot, and we do want people, and when you do your blitz, if you don't do every house, all the neighbors are comparing notes, and they know who got picked and who didn't, and they're mad about that. So you can't win sometimes.
One of the things that we can do, even though we'll wait until the next meeting to talk about this again and get closer to finalizing it. Staff has already started doing some of the work on how we're going to address these because the conversation's been going on. Mike and his staff and Andy Badel have been talking about what we were going to do in order to accomplish this. So we'll continue to meet and refine that, because I think this is the gist of where we're going to go as far as these challenges and the things we want to accomplish. And we can then modify, take another period of time after that. There's no reason really, I don't feel, for staff to wait until final approval, because I think this is the direction that you want to go. It's just really about you fine tuning it and feeling good about it saying what you want to say with regards to these challenges and these goals.
I agree.
Okay. Well, because I don't want to rush, and I do want Neil involved, and I want you to have the time to get. I want all those pieces. We do want, again, maybe it makes more sense to you now that the idea of taking it out for public input, at least when Brent and I talked about it a few weeks ago, was if we could get it to the point where it was where what we want is agreement on our assumptions, our aspirational goals, and the challenges, and what from a committee and the council point of view, what we're putting out as this is what we want to see changed. There really are only a couple of policy things within that. If we need to go after the state law changed, we need to get the legal interpretation of vegetation and the sync up with the forestry done. Other than that, it's a huge challenge. We do want to be, why not Topeka, right? We'll figure it out. But it, mobilizing activities toward the goals to improve the looks of neighborhoods is huge. So we need to get started. It needs to be clear that we've all agreed that this is where we want to go, or people probably won't get started. It's good to have the staff. Is there something that what Mike was sharing was that on this very first goal where it was reduce the current number of substandard structures by 50%, when I wrote that, we have in that aspirational goal to get it down to no more than 500 active complaints. And maybe that's the most helpful number in there. But we were talking about it, and I said, well, I'm going off the 4,300 that was in the housing study. And they came back with 360. I'm like, we can't talk about this 360 on the street. It's not going to work. We got to figure something else out. So Mike's right. If we normally wouldn't feel like we had to, but if we need to define substandard or come up with a better word for the purposes of clarity,
And there are, with the information that I read off of this, Karen, whatever, the consultant, there are some additional things, but I will just send that by email to consider. Yeah.
Well, why don't we do that? Let's all look at obviously the PowerPoint sort of distilled down even more what is in this 2-page document. What we would need to think about is what we would want to approve. Again, my thought was we do a preliminary recommendation out of the committee so that we can officially challenge the staff and get the staff response and then go out for public input, and that we might send something to the council just to alert them where we are and get their input as well. If that's not going to be the first week of July, if it's going to be the first week of August instead, okay. But I do want us to finish by the end of the year so that we've finished our work in time for the staff to have clear direction, and also, so if there's a change in the committee, nobody has to start over.
Yeah.
They can just pick up where we left off. So,
No, that's fine.
and so if you have other thoughts about what ought to be included in here, anybody does, Mike, Brent,
I'll email
Andy,
that to you guys.
we can email it around to the whole group. Hopefully that's all right. It's just information and thoughts sharing. We can all bring that back at the meeting as far as COMA purposes to have discussed it. But
And one of the things that Councilwoman Valdivia mentioned that I think we need to gather, and I made a note, is the process the judge is currently using. We have many cases that are dismissed because the violator took care of the issue related to the house beforehand. Or they show up and they say, I've made this much progress, and they can even show pictures and proof, and the inspector validates it. So then the judge will say, okay, I'll give you 60 more days to finish the project. But then there are others that we file charges against them, and then we have a hard time finding them. And it ends up being oftentimes a warrant for their arrest related to a violation of that.
Simply not appearing.
Yeah, because they didn't appear. And so then that ends up being another challenge. Do we want to go after people that all they did was not fix up their house from the standpoint of a criminal violation? And so that's the hard part that oftentimes happens, is we want to make not fixing your house a criminal violation. So,
Yet it gives you a hammer.
yeah, but you're right,
And
it
that's
does. And so,
traditionally-
but I'll work to get some statistics related to those issues, because they create them, and there's a clear record there that exists that I can get, because I used to be provided it by Judge Bixel. I hadn't asked from it because it was not an issue that we were talking about, but now I can get him to pull those numbers together.
That's good, and even then, and I briefly described it, I understand why the staff had the idea some years ago now of having this administrative judge procedure in the middle. At first, they were referring every single case. It was a huge caseload. Then there was sort of some oversight, looking back at them, going, that you shouldn't automatically get it. It's like automatically giving everybody an appeal. So they backed it off to where it only went to the next level if the person appealed. Otherwise, the staff could move forward. But, you know, if we've got, again, this gets to taxpayer cost and effective consequences, again, that's one of our goals, is to review. So it doesn't have to happen before we would push this document out, but looking at all those steps and the time that's involved and how effective it is to have every single one of those steps in there.
Because I think currently we're doing one docket a week as it relates to housing cases, code cases. That right, Mike? We're still at one?
Normally it's one. Every few weeks they throw in a second one because it's building up.
Okay.
What's a docket?
A docket is the list of potential
List.
violators
Okay.
that need to appear in court.
Now, just to clarify, because, and you may not know, that some time ago, we created a housing docket, and the judges really are familiar with these cases, and they're
That's one thing it was
specifically
stating
focused on
on
that.
that.
Yes.
Okay.
So we do have that, and I don't know, well, you guys could give us feedback as well as citizens as to whether it seems that the judges are knowledgeable enough about code. But that seems to reasonably be working pretty well.
Yeah, that's what I was
But
referring
where
to.
that, how big that administrative docket is in between the inspectors, and, because that's actually part of the municipal court, right?
Yes, those violations are
Administrative
sent.
hearings.
Yes, and there are inspectors. Mike always has an inspector there for those dockets, so that if the judge has questions, that inspector can provide that information. And it's a couple hour docket, isn't it, Mike?
Yes, it is. I encourage anybody to go to a docket to see who's actually going to court for failing to comply.
You should go at least
Okay.
once. It's interesting to sit through.
And it can be shocking to realize it's not the bad people you think they are. It's people that can't do it for one reason or the other.
Yeah.
And it's disheartening. You see this, you want to help them even more than we're helping them. But it's not as easy. And the judges, when it started, they married all court cases together. So parking tickets, traffic fines, criminal arrest, housing, all showed up every day. Just whatever day they had a court. And you didn't have any expertise. Your prosecutor, just went through the motions on a housing case. And when we sat down with prosecution, they were totally on board, and the prosecutor's familiar with housing cases and what the laws are, and the judge is extremely familiar with it. And if it gets to a point where the person won't comply, then they set it up for court. I mean, it's like literal court and it can go to, then they appeal that, it goes to district court, where we could actually have a housing case that has a jury. So it's not as quick and easy as we would like to envision it, but the system that we have is extremely efficient right now and is addressing, they're almost keeping up to speed with the amount that we're presenting.
And again, as I mentioned, in the little chronology I did at the beginning, it used to be that the city was in pretty good shape. The inspectors did everything, the supervisor had the appeals, but our problem was that the court wasn't prepared. And as things slid, that was the hole. And so there was no ultimate consequences. And I think that's one of the reasons that we got to where we are. Because the people who knew it didn't feel like they needed to make any changes. And so we're needing to work our way back out of that.
The whole.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank
Everything
you.
that you do, I think you know how much we appreciate it. So this whole process, it took a little while to clarify that, but it was not to be beating anybody over the head about what they weren't doing, but instead, how do we come up with where we want to be, and how do we get there? Take advantage of the staff that we have and the creativity and rather than the problems that they see being barriers to getting where we want to go, to figure out how to get past them.
And Mike, do we still have, I think you were going to say something, do we still have any federal home loan money left? You know? Or
I'm
do I
not
need-
sure there's any of it left. Each time that I've talked with Corey, who's administering it, they had it spent and then something falls through and they get a little bit back.
Oh, okay.
You know, like somebody's house that qualified, but then they sold the house or whatever, so
Right.
they didn't do it. And then I guess I'm dropping this on you here in the Zoom meeting, but as you know, we're down 2 inspectors. I just received a 2-week notice from a 3rd inspector. So we're gonna be back down to short 3. I have nobody applying. There's not been a single person to apply for this position for 2 months, or at least the HR sent us it. No, they said nobody's applied. And being down 3 now, if any of you that are watching this know somebody that is qualified to be a property maintenance inspector, I beg of you to send them our way, because it is killing me to be down almost half my staff.
Good
Plus, I
point,
really
Mike.
like all those people.
And I know Corey is planning to reapply again for
That's
the
what my
federal home
understanding
loan
was,
bank
yeah.
money. And why that's important is if they're found to be in violation by the judge, then they qualify for the federal home loan bank money. And that's why that's
Oh,
important.
that's to
And-
help them with painting.
Right.
Right,
all of that.
painting,
Yeah,
repairs
that
to
was that
gutters,
grant that
whatever.
Well,
could
or
get.
it could be more than
Right.
that.
It could be roofs, I think.
You know, your roof, your, if your
So-
kitchen's unsanitary or.
It helped
you
us
know,
to get a lot of homes fixed
broken
up
windows, things
for
like
people that could not afford to do it
Right,
on their
right.
own.
And so that whole safety net of, now that we've got that FHLB, which I think the staff has been, as long as it's available, now that they've discovered it, and I think Councilwoman Ortiz gets credit for giving them a tip about it anyway, to continue doing that, but you combine that with neighbors and teenage kids and other community-wide programs to cover, yeah. Weatherization, which we're maybe gonna start doing here soon too. All right, well, we will revisit this. We'll have some communication in between. Staff will work on it. We will not activate moving this forward yet until we've met again. Is the 23rd of June, which is this same day of the month and time of day, does that work for people?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's assume that we're gonna just pop forward 4 weeks and meet again on the 23rd then.
Sounds good.
I'm not positive I will be in town on that day. I have pending plans.
Good for you. Well, and we've got the possibility of going a week later, especially now that we're not moving this in July.
I'll be out of town the next week.
Okay, never mind.
If I don't have to be there, I don't have to be there.
Well, it's good to have you here, but
Understand.
we can,
Yeah, I have a lunch meeting at 11:30, but otherwise I'm available then.
And just let me.
at
just look
11:30,
this.
so maybe we need to meet at 9 instead of 10? Or else later? I mean, we were 10 to 12 today.
Yeah, I could do 9 that day as well.
Yeah, because I'll be gone from the 24th through the evening of the 30th.
Okay, well, we want to get this done, so 9 to 11 on the 20,
9 to 11.
to the
Yeah.
3rd?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Did you say the 23rd?
I
Yeah.
did.
I'm cool on the 23rd. It's the
Oh, you
24th.
are? Okay.
Okay. I'll get it out of my account.
All right.
All right,
Well,
thanks.
we'll get Liz to get it out. Thanks, Liz. All right, thanks, everybody. We're moving this.
Yeah.
Glad you're here.